to another episode of MentorEd, an ongoing series brought to you by Alliance Tutoring. I'm Ken Hinker. I've spoken in one of the earliest episodes about the formation of the word mentor, about its original usage in Homer's The Odyssey. I wanted to speak today about another text that I love to teach, another piece of epic poetry, and that's Dante's Divine Comedy. The mentor here is for Dante himself. Dante wrote the selection of poems in the 13th century, and it is an amazing panoply of creative history, of allegory, of Christian religious instruction. It almost defies categorization. But like everyone, Dante needed to take inspiration from a mentor. And it turns out that this particular mentor of his wasn't someone that he knew personally, but in fact it was the poet Virgil from the Roman era. And Dante called him his mentor in poetry and his mentor in life. When Dante's Inferno begins, Dante and Virgil will make a trip through hell, up through purgatory, and ultimately into heaven. This is supposed to be an examination of the Christian afterlife and the effects of sin and virtue that will take place when one lives according to the Christian scripture. But it does more than that. And I want to speak about the allegory today and the way in which having a mentor allows Dante to achieve the knowledge that he needs and to put that knowledge to use in the service of others. Dante is given the mentor, Virgil, by a divine power. And sometimes that's the way that mentors come into our life too. Perhaps you don't believe in divinity, that's fine. But the world does work in mysterious ways. Sometimes we're called to be that mentor for another. Sometimes that mentor shows up on our doorstep unbidden. And occasionally we find ourselves in professional or familial situations where we know it's our responsibility to mentor people that are either younger than us or who are new to the craft, new to the professional craft. And so I want us to think briefly today about the way in which Dante and Virgil move through the circles of the Inferno, going ever downward towards the knowledge of good and evil. And that's an allegory for the way in which mentors operate with their mentees, which is to say, they light the rocky path ahead of their young charges. This is the way, of course, that teachers operate. This is the way that tutors operate. This is the way that allows that young person to see an expert in the field, take them seriously, and make their own education a top priority. When Dante and Virgil come into limbo before they get down near the real sinners, Dante discovers that he is met with a number of poets of old. These are some of Virgil's contemporaries or perhaps others. These too are icons for Dante. These are his instructors in language, and these are his instructors in art. When he sees these, he is stunned to find out that they have beckoned him forward. He says, "And I numbered one among their company." And this, I think, is an allegorical lesson for those of us who are teaching, to point out to students that while one is studying for sure, it's important to think of a student as one among a company of learners. When we mentor people in the education field, we want them to understand that they are taking part in the wide tapestry of all that can be understood. And ultimately, though, the company that you keep is also important for those of us that are mentors ourselves. That is to say that we all need to learn from one another how to go about the proper instruction and the proper guidance of those that are younger than us. None of us ever stops learning, that's the old cliche, and it's important for us to remember that Dante himself knew that while he was going to become one of the all-time great poets, just like the company that he keeps, we ought to hold ourselves to the same kind of high standards. We want to do our absolute excellent best in order to bring our charges into the company of learners, the company of professionals, if that's the kind of mentor that you are. Well, once we understand that there are three parts to the Divine Comedy, we must understand that while Dante goes through Inferno first, that is to say hell, the location of sinners in the afterlife, the knowledge he gains there is crucial because it will allow him to ultimately ascend to the mountain of purgatory and then finally to take his place up in the heavens, close to the saints and close ultimately to God. The allegory here is that while it's difficult for students, while it's difficult for all of us to go through the rigors and the hardships that come with long-term studying, that come with learning how to be an adult, that come with learning to discipline our minds, we, all of us then, will ascend into knowledge and learn how to use it properly. And here's the kicker, at least for me as a mentor, is that I tell my students all the time, the function of what you're doing as a student is not to get into school. It's not to get into a great job, although those things are both important. In fact, it's to put your best effort and your best mind into the service of others. And so this is the way then that Virgil will operate with Dante. He instructs him in the ways to avoid sin. He instructs him in the ways of virtue. He gives him a multitude of different tasks and challenges that Dante must complete. And ultimately, he leads him closer to the understanding that armed with that knowledge, Dante will go out and he will serve others. And of course, this is what he does by writing the Divine Comedy. This is what he does by publishing that and giving it to the world. And then, of course, like all mentor-mentee relationships, Virgil will fade away back into the nether reaches, and Dante will become the mentor for all of us. And then as I read the Divine Comedy, I learn how to use it for my students, how I can give them that knowledge and allow them to see the world as a capacious, wide expanse of understanding and excitement. So, Virgil becomes then a guide through the hard times, and he gives Dante proper admonishment. Every mentor ought to be able to do that, but always gives praise just as easily and just as often. It must be laced with respect and care in the same way that that group of iconic ancient poets gave Dante himself respect, in the same way that Virgil took care for Dante's education and allowed him to become the best version of himself and to give that self over to the larger community. And this, I hope, is what mentors do. And this, I hope, is what you get to do in the same way that I do. It's a powerful responsibility. It's heartening and it's fulfilling. I'll see you next time.